One. Dave, Distributist, welcome to the Gauntlet.
Hello.
Sorry about the way your name is wrapping off around the screen there. That's most undignified.
No,
By the
no,
way,
it's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I picked a bad name, so there you
go. Do I need to explain the premise of the show, or should we just go ahead?
Oh, we should just go ahead. It's basically like answering questions on a variety of.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I've seen a few of these
per question. So pick a broad topic here: music,
Excellent.
economics, or cosmology.
Oof. Well, I'm going to be contrarian. I'm going to go for music right now.
All right. Live music is more important than recorded music. Rhythm matters more than harmony, or the emotional authenticity of music has been diluted.
Oh man, this is this is really tough. I have opinions on all of these things.
That's going to be your problem the whole game, I think.
Yeah, that's that of course. I could kind of answer both questions at once. The emotional authenticity of music has been diluted is the one that's coming to mind the most for me. And it is intimately connected to live music. This is one of the most notable things I've noticed across my own lifespan being a conscious, aware adult, and that is how much music has declined as a form of identification, replaced mainly by things like video games and politics. And I know every generation believes this. Every generation believes that music was good in their era and it died off. But this is something that I think it's really notable also with the decline of rock and roll and its replacement by rap and pop music. And it also has something intimately to do with sort of the feminization of music as well, at least in America. And I guess I don't, the cause, well, it's obviously most immediately the internet. But I think that one of the major reasons that music has declined in its emotional authenticity is its separation from the actual production of music and both the instrumentation and the singing. And the thing is that very few people in sort of the modern world have opportunities to create music in a meaningful way and experience it in a meaningful way. And if you're somebody who goes to concerts and experiences it that way, or as a musician themselves in a way that it requires craft and participation, that is something that it connects you into music in a way that you don't have it as a consumer product. And one of my favorite bands obviously is the Grateful Dead. They're a Northern Californian band. They were only really known for live performances. They were never known for studio albums at all. It's very difficult to even name one Grateful Dead song that got radio play, and they were almost always known for live music. I never saw them when they were alive. Maybe some of the members that survived till I was in college I saw, but this was an entire culture that was built up around live performances. And that's how humans authentically experience music, is they experience music in the moment. And when you had music that was, say, like CDs and vinyls, these physical products, even though they were consumer products, they came with a certain set of moments, like the moment you bought, to list a band that I remember from high school, Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. And the moment you stayed up late when they played the entire album on the radio, and the moment where your favorite song comes on the radio. The radio creates a situation where a recorded product suddenly becomes a moment in time that cannot be replaced. But now that all music is eternally online, these products are, first of all, they now have gone from being consumer products, as they were in the late 20th century, to being almost pure consumer products. And not only that, they're 100% on demand. And it's not really very obvious what a piece of music means outside the context of experience, and when you can have it at any moment at the click of a button. So that's my answer to that question, but I know I'm also kind of answering the one that's 2 slots above it.
I mean, that's extra points if you can answer multiple questions at once. I feel like there's three narratives that people put up for the decline of music. One is everything broke down at the beginning of the 20th century when everything became experimental and postmodern. One is the 60s killed music.
Interesting.
Everything went to pot. And then there's what you mentioned, which I guess would be the 80s was the high point of music, and after the web in the 90s and everybody, you know, the ability to access music for free destroyed it and no longer made it a central cultural moment.
This is, you know, I think
maybe there's a new one that's about to happen with AI music as well. I can imagine.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I think so. Although I think that's going to kind of accelerate the process that we're already seeing with the decline of emotional authenticity in music. You know, music as sort of a formula of beats is not meaningful. It has to have some larger connection to meaning. And the really interesting thing that we have in front of us is not music as music. It's not sort of measuring the further decline, because I think that's just more or less a fait accompli with the internet era. And especially since we're, you know, because young kids are less into music, fewer intelligent, interesting people are becoming musicians, and so it becomes like this accelerating process even without AI. And I'm sure AI will just accelerate it another level down this road. But the really interesting thing is what avenues will music continue to have incredible meaning? Because I don't think that you couldn't salvage a subculture of music that would be able to preserve some of what music did mean back when I remember it as a young man, or just how it existed all throughout at least Western history as sort of a sacred element of religious worship.
I guess music is something that's very deeply connected to the human soul. And before the invention of recorded music, it required a person or a community to come together, and it was a scarcity to it that meant it was more joyful as a collective experience. And now everybody has their headphones in and they're having a very individualistic experience of music.
Yeah, maybe the iPhone, people forget about that. The iPhone was a major thing that killed the authenticity of music. Well, the iPod, right? The iPhone definitely killed it, because now everyone's very, very distracted.
I guess the iPod meant you could maybe the Walkman meant that you didn't have to be in your house even to listen to music, and the iPod meant that you didn't have to pick a CD to take with you, and then the iPhone meant that you didn't even have to load the songs onto your phone before leaving the house at all.
The iPod is more relevant than the Walkman, because the iPod killed the radio and the Walkman did not. The radio is the important sort of, well, in the late 20th century, is this important spiritual element of music, and that's why so many popular rock songs reference the radio even after the radio ceased to become a big deal. And you know, like Queen or half the other bands, or Radiohead or whatever, right? You know, the radio is the central pivot point for late 20th century music, because that is how an individual song becomes a thing that is playing right now for the collective. Once everyone is individuated, so they're listening to it on their iPods, then the music doesn't really have space, right? It doesn't have dominion over anything. It's just a sort of an individuated experience that you might as well be intaking like a daydream.
Well, I'm going to give you your score for this round, and
thank
move
you.
us on, just because you know, time is limited.
Excellent.
But it is strange to hear you just talk on a subject for 10 minutes.
No, yeah, usually it's longer. Okay. Oh man, I'm gonna just pick history, because that just sounds much more interesting than the other two, or much more specific.
Cultures that adapt are most likely to survive. Religion is the most potent force in shaping civilizations, or revisionist history is necessary to understand the past.
Um, well, I'm gonna cop out here and pick the religion is the most potent force in shaping civilizations. This is kind of a freebie for me. I'm going to get my brain a break because
Sure.
this is just my spiel online, more or less, is kind of hammering this point again and again. There is no way that civilizations can get away from the question of belief. And I forget if Spengler specifically says this, but it's very obvious in Spengler's version of history that his civilizational epochs trace specific religious traditions. And
Mm.
most notably, in Europe, you have the division between the classical and the Faustian. And the Faustian is basically just Christian civilization, and the classical is basically pre-Christian civilization. Or with Hindu civilization, right? Hindu civilization comes about because of the caste system and the various religions that grew up around the caste system. Talking about the Hindu civilization, when you talk about the Indus Valley civilization, even though the genes of the people are the same thing, is not a
Hmm.
particularly meaningful distinction. And I think this is something that people who do Machiavellian political theory, I feel that's always left out of the analysis, is that these narratives that people use, these political formulas from the Italian elite school, like bullshit, 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 therefore we rule. Religions are always part of your religion. It's always part of your uh what political formula, right? It's always part of your political formula as a ruler, but the political formula you choose is the most relevant thing of all time. And if you have an unhealthy political formula, your civilization is going to go down in a ball of flames. And that's one of the main reasons. That's what's killing our civilization right now. It's not that we have a political formula. It's not even that people are stopped believing in our political formula. It's that our political formula has just become completely poisonous, largely due to the fact that we're trying to take ideas that were meant to be essentially spiritual and move them into a purely materialistic framework. And so that's my history of civilizations is the history of religious ideas adapting over time. And I think that to answer the other questions, because I really can't help myself, right? I think
Yeah.
quick adaptation is really something that individuals and sort of short-lived regimes need to do at a long enough time frame. When we talk about religions, these are sort of like geological formations that we're really reacting to more than we are shaping them. So, our kind of response in this moment of civilizational crisis is to kind of adapt to this gigantic religious misstep that our civilization has made, and which is leading to it essentially, probably resetting at some fundamental level, and figuring out how we're going to align ourselves relative to that. And that's
How
go
do
ahead.
we know that it's not the other way around, that the civilization is the most potent force in shaping religion?
Interesting question. I mean, well, I mean, the question is, I understand what a religion is, and I don't really understand what a civilization is, and that's a cop out, right? Like, if it, I can explain, what a religion encouraged people to do, and then I can tell a story about how, causality is always this incredibly difficult thing to parse out. And I know
Mm.
that this is literally a cop out, because what I'm telling you is my conceptual framework only allows me to read causality in one direction. But since I know what a
Oh.
religion is and I know what they do, I can see their actions impacting something like civilizational health, like fecundity, right? Um,
Mhm.
Fecundity is, I think that I don't think it's necessarily the best. Well, it's not necessarily the best measure, but it's the only one that's reliable, in my opinion, and measurable over time across multiple civilizations. Whereas I don't, I understand that civilizations go through cycles, and towards the end, the birth rates drop precipitously. But saying that civilization caused that birth rate to drop I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because I don't even know
Yeah.
what the civilizational force is. I know what the religious force is because I know how religion exists in the individual, and I can see how religion exists in the individual can create the emergent property of religion in the collective. But I don't know how civilization exists in the individual. It's imperceptible to us.
I
So
guess the theory would be that if civilizations have this cycle, birth and life and death, that the religion adapts to match the trajectory that the civilization was on independently, and during a thriving time of civilization, you have a healthy religion in response. And then when the civilization is dying, you get these very twisted religious conceptions.
Well, that's not I think that actually is fairly accurate. Like, for instance, like Christianity is a good example, and this is one thing that I always say, and I kind of push back on the Spenglerian concept. Christianity has spanned multiple civilizations. You know, it emerged in the, it was emerged in the Augustan period of Rome, but you could also imagine it emerging in the Augustan period, like month-wise, like the late summer period of Rome, right, just before the fall and winter, right? And it went through the Merovingian era. So what you see is, you see like this few hundred years of Christians, where these Christians are just have nothing even approaching what would be a Western context for their belief. And then furthermore, in the Reformation, like the Western civilization hits this mini reset button where they have kind of like, you know, these sort of protean faiths that the sort of naivety of like a new civilization emerging from the heart of an existing civilization. Very much when you look at the Puritans, you look at like these people who just think that they're the first people ever to exist in the entire world, and their embrace of the faith is completely 100% blithe. It's not even, it's less cynical than like the late Renaissance embrace of faith, paradoxically, even though it comes later. So, I mean, you know, you are correct, and it is a feedback loop, and Christianity it's remained doctrinally consistent, but it definitely does sort of ride the tiger. In late Rome, it behaves a little bit more like a late Roman civilization, and in the sort of protein periods where things are emerging like new, it behaves like a brand new faith. And I think we're obviously in one of these declining periods right now, and I'd say it's a two-way street. But if I had to pick one way that was more influential, I would say that it was religion to civilizational dynamics in my estimation.
To what degree do the people follow the religion of the elites?
Well, yeah, most of the time. I mean, if they're not following your religion, they're not really your elites, they're your conquerors, right?
Well,
I mean,
yes.
you know,
but that can be the dynamic, right?
Of course. I mean, like, you know, in when half of Christendom was taken over by Muslims, it was a majority Christian population under the thumb of the caliphate, right? And, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that people always follow the trends of the elite, and if they are, I mean, people follow elites, people are governed, and in many ways, sort of the most important thing you can determine as an ordinary person are the people who you trust and want to follow. And you know, that absolutely determined that there's some portion of the population that converted to Islam, and then, you know, some I think actually a larger percent remained sort of loyal to Christianity under Islam, were replaced over time by Arabic populations, for the most part. And you know, I don't know. I mean, I think that people follow elites, and sometimes they follow them to new faiths. But in my opinion, this is also kind of a cop out. The decision of what elite you follow in this sense is kind of a religious decision.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think,
so like,
yeah,
I follow the elite called the Pope because I'm Catholic, but that's not like, you know, that's not an irreligious decision, right? You know, it's not like I was following the Pope and he decided to convert to Catholicism, right?
Yes, if the Pope converted to Islam, how many Catholics would follow him? It's always what I was
Question.
thinking about was the historiography of the Bible and the Old Testament, which by my reading, say you read through Judges or Kings or whatever, it's told from the perspective of what the king is doing. Sometimes you hear people who are remaining faithful in the midst of an unfaithful nation, but generally the perspective seems to be that the most important thing is whether or not the king is worshipping God, and then that affects how everybody else behaves in general. And since that's the perspective that the Bible has on history, I kind of feel like it's reasonable to continue to read current affairs in that way to the degree that we can.
I mean, aren't there are prophets who speak out against the king, right? And there are people who follow the prophets, certainly. So, I mean, I think that's more or less the model, right? Although, this is the thing, right? I mean, who do you follow, the prophet or the king? Is sort of the question that ordinary people like us have.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to give you 18 again. So on to round 3. Cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology?
Oh, I can't resist cinema and theater.
Okay. Entertainment is the primary utility of cinema. Casting should reflect demographic realities, or we have lost the communal experience of storytelling.
We've lost the this is going to end up with questions that sound a little bit too much like my music ones.
Oh yeah,
I'm trying to pick one that will lead me down an avenue that's not going to exposit on the same thing. But I just said, I think entertainment is the primary utility of cinema. Well, I'm going to disagree with that. I think that cinema. God, I'm really attempting to double dip on these things. Cinema is a form of religious. This is another thing, like in the 20th century. Think of how many works of fiction in the 20th century directly cross-reference the act of going to the movies. This was a religious practice in the 20th century, and one that almost entirely declined in the 21st century. The point where it's being kind of put to bed, and it builds on an earlier tradition of theater going. This is the ultimate mistake of modern movies, is that they believe themselves to be entertainment, and they don't understand sort of the religious property of themselves. And I had a Twitter thread that I wanted to write something more about. And again, it's kind of vaguely related to this, and that is, why does the Daily Wire not do Shakespeare productions? They've just released all of these cringe cartoons, and when you think about it, I mean, Shakespeare it sort of captures what cinema, like this, the sacred property of the cinema, immediately in one go, especially if you come from an Anglophone tradition like ours. I mean, I don't know how you experience Shakespeare perhaps as a child, but as kind of like a children of college professors, we always used to go to this town called Ashland on the Oregon coast, or not Oregon mountains, but and they had this year-round Shakespeare festival, and this was a semi-sacred experience watching Shakespeare. And when I think back to movies that I've really enjoyed, it's not really their enjoyment, it's the fact that this movie was just something that stuck out in my mind as a spectacle that had spiritual significance to me. I mean, a good example is King Lear, or for plays, or No Country for Old Men as a movie. I mean, these are movies that are incredibly difficult to watch. They're uncomfortable. But there's a certain spiritual significance in these performances that needs to be that's the only reason really why you go and are marked by the cinema. And this is one of the reasons why the kind of Marvel movie phenomenon is so horrifically depressing. There was this I forget. I used to read Robert Ebert reviews because I was a big movie buff back in the 90s. And he said that, he met people. Someone was creating I can't remember what science fiction franchise it was, but this is like the third movie in the science fiction franchise. And he says, well, apparently people are watching this because they're fans of this franchise. And he said, I once knew a Shakespeare person who dedicated his entire life to Romeo and Juliet and said that he would do anything to see Romeo and Juliet for the first time again. And then he said, someone who had that attitude about this cinema, like they're organizing their entire lives around this franchise, is too depressing to imagine. And that's the really thing about the Marvel movies, what makes them so horrific in their existence. Like their existence is horrifying. I mean, I hate to say, like, there probably is a Substack essay to be written called like the existential horror of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And like they're not like bad, they're not even bad movies, right? Like any individual Marvel movie, or at least the ones I saw up to Infinity War, they were passable films. But the thing is that people are organizing their lives around them. And when it's something like, my wife is the biggest fan of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies. And I don't really understand this because I'm a fan of the books. And right now we're reading the books together again. And I'm kind of trying to sell her on the fact that the books are so much better than the Peter Jackson movies, which I always thought were and they're fine, right? But that's the full statement of them, right? They're not terrible. But I get that, right? Because like seeing Lord of the Rings and loving it is an experience that actually touches on pure moments of holiness that are brought forward in the cinema, and I know what they are, and I kind of feel it too, and sometimes some scenes in that movie I definitely do feel. But with Marvel movies, it's this thing that has kind of completely captured the imagination of a generation, and it's just pure entertainment, and you feel like you're participating in an act of idolatry. Right.
Well, it's yes. I mean, in some cases, it's literally that the characters are gods. Not even that they have the properties of gods, but they are to be literal deities.
But they're such puny. Oh, I literally quoting from Marvel. God damn it! They're such puny gods. But yeah, that's literally
one thing we can agree: with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh no. I'm criticized. I accidentally quoted Marvel, but they're such puny gods. And I'll tell you this: like, I guess I've enjoyed a few movies. I enjoyed the Godzilla movie because it felt wholesome, and I liked that a lot. But the only movie director that I can still watch is Ari Aster, and the last few movies I saw of his, I walked out of the theater feeling like I wanted to kind of throw up. I don't know if you've ever seen Ari Aster movies like Hereditary or Midsommar.
I don't think
these movies are they're kind of demonic. I mean, they know they're demonic. They're depicting the demonic. Well, Hereditary is literally depicting the demonic. But and it really, like, it feels like staring into one of those paintings by Peter Bruegel or something like that you can see from the old world, or The Triumph of Death, or a Bosch painting or something like that. And they're really disturbing, and they're really uncomfortable, and I literally feel I feel incredibly uneasy watching them. But I appreciate them as actual cinema, because although they depict just this absolutely horrific world, I respect that as trying to touch the spiritual, even if it might be trying to show me what can only be described as demonic, even in the ones that aren't actually about demons, like the most recent one, Beau is Afraid, which literally had an extended meditation on religion inside of it. So I don't know, that's my statement about cinema. I guess it has to touch the holy, even if it's not entertaining.
This I guess comment I want to make, a thought that I've had on I guess it's the broad culture of reviews of movies, reviews of games on YouTube. And it's probably even more true within the kind of right right-wing reactionary sphere as again, that there's a lot of what feels like post facto rationalization of a dislike of something. So you go and
Yeah.
watch a film, and then you put together your video essay, and you put together some thesis about what makes a great movie. And because the movie you just watched goes against your thesis, that proves that it's a
Yeah.
bad movie. But
The
you've
Critical
constructed
Drinker
your
is a good
thesis.
example of that, right?
Yeah, it just your thesis is only exists because you want to dunk on this movie. And if another movie comes up that is a good movie and you like it, and it breaks your previous thesis, you won't at any point own up to the fact that you you tried to construct a greater principle. I kind of feel like for honesty within movie reviews, people ought to be required to state their principles in advance, like at least 6 months before they see the film, and then only then can they rationally say this is why I don't like this movie, because I pre-registered my
Yeah, well, I
pre-registered
mean,
my framework.
a lot of descriptions about what's good and bad writing. I know I did this essay like a while back at the beginning of the year called "The Holy Moments," where I kind of took the Critical Drinker. I don't think he read it, obviously, but like I kind of took to task this idea that bad and inconsistent writing is driving badness in filmmaking, and I listed several movies that are just undisputably poorly written, but that I loved
Mhm.
anyway. Like Singing in the
Yes.
Rain. Singing in the Rain is a badly written movie. It's horribly written. It's horribly paced. It doesn't make any sense, right? You know,
Yeah.
but it's a great
Yeah.
movie. It's a great movie, and you know,
And the problem with this inaccurate critique is not just that it's annoying, but I think it actually drives it does eventually lead to bad outcomes. I'd argue that Disney did respond to a lot of the YouTube movie criticism when they were making the new Star Wars films. They
mhm.
were like, "We did everything you told us that we should be doing to make these films good. So now will you like them?" But the problem was the criticisms of the prequels, for example, were not really accurate. It was a gut feeling of I don't like something. Now let's try and just pin lots of ideas onto this mannequin.
Yeah, you
And
could, especially for I think you're referring to like The Force Awakens, which
Mhm.
when I saw that movie, I'm like, this is a paint by numbers movie of how a person would make a Star Wars movie to avoid all of the criticisms that Red Letter Media made
Yeah.
about the prequels. It's
This is
exactly what
like
I thought walking out of The Force Awakens. Exactly what I thought. You know, and
if we if
what happens is there's only one movie you can make, and because people don't want to make that
right.
movie again, they had to
Yeah.
kind of just toss the script out for. I mean, I'll say this about The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker is the spiritual movie that Hollywood at that time wanted to make, and people are not wrong to like that movie. I mean, they don't like the philosophy of that movie. That's why they don't like it. Right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like Rise of Skywalker embodied what Hollywood actually was feeling from
Mm.
2013 to present day. And that, you know, Brienne Johnson very much embodies that sort of late Obama era sensibility.
You
And
mean
they
The Last Jedi was the middle one,
The
right?
Last Jedi, yeah, The
Rian
Last
Johnson.
Jedi.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That actually embodied what the creators of Star Wars wanted to make. The problem is that the spiritual vision that the creators of Star Wars wanted to set out was 100% misaligned to the spiritual vision that their fans wanted to experience. And so what
Mm.
you have is you have one strange social justice Star Wars movie sandwiched in between two boring focus grouped paint by numbers, let's not offend anyone movies, and no one's happy with anything. It's this huge, complete
Yeah.
meaningless.
This first and third one felt cynical and insincere, and the
Yes.
middle one felt insincere because it was silly in a way. It was a non-serious. It wasn't trying to make money. So in a way, you got to pick
Mhm.
your poison. Do you want the director who's going to try and market you a shiny, soulless thing, or do you want the director who's going to just kind of laugh in your face, but at least do something that they have some interest in?
Yeah, I mean,
Probably I'd pick Ryan Johnson, given the two.
I would. I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, Ryan Johnson produced an interesting cultural artifact, right? And really, I kind of be more interested to see. I mean, I know Ryan Johnson's movies that aren't Star Wars, and they have a lot of the same irritating elements in them, you know. And he's not a bad director, right? But I kind of actually would want to see him make a space movie that didn't have like the icons like Luke Skywalker that he could kind of use to shore up his narrative storytelling. If he was just kind of on his own, like just write a new movie about people in space, that would have been more interesting. But anyway,
I think George Lucas, if he could, would have done a Flash Gordon film instead of Star Wars. So it's interesting to think that may have degraded his art in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it forces you to be original about all of this, or you know, not super original, but original enough. And you know, we're just kind of too. I mean, the problem is that we just the spiritual vision matters behind a movie, and if someone's preaching a religion that you don't believe in, you know, you're not going to believe in that movie. I mean, Star Wars was the same thing. The thing is, it happened to be that George Lucas was very much tapping into a spiritual sensibility that people were craving in the 70s and early 80s.
I just think George Lucas has a certain seriousness. You could sit and talk to George Lucas in 1977 for 8 hours about spirituality, and he'd have interesting things to say. The other things that you like you mentioned, the Peter Jackson and also Dune, right? Is another relevant work that are both drawing a lot out of source material from deep thinking people with a lot to say, and it's so different to experience something that's had so much thought poured into it versus something that is just a product, just packaging for All right, I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna give you 18 again.
All right, let's get going.
Round 4, psychology, elite theory, theology.
I mean, I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to challenge Lambda Bible studies to a theology contest, and I'm really tired of talking about elite theory, so it's going to have to be psychology for me.
Okay. Well, never predicted that.
Never challenge a Protestant to a Bible contest.
He can get nerdy quicker than you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Addiction is a symptom of societal failings. This is sort of Peter Hitchens. No, well, maybe. Dreams offer significant insight into our subconscious, or individuals lose their moral compass in group settings.
Ooh, I mean, I'm gonna pick the one I feel the most. I could probably the other two I have to really think about. Right. This
is a snappy game.
Yeah. This is a snappy game. The addiction one, because I believe very strongly that addiction is a social failing. That this is something that we've known for a very long time, and you know, and people oftentimes like the whole, you know, the dreaded thing of HBD confuses this. So like you see that some societies can handle alcohol a lot better. You know, for instance, the Irish famously handle alcohol less well than Anglo-Saxons. The Japanese handle alcohol less well than, you know, the French do, at least in constitutionally, right? And the same thing applies for Native Americans. But the problem is that that's not. The problem isn't that it takes 2 drinks to get you under the table, and then in some other race or whatever takes 4. That's not what creates situations like you see, for instance, on Native American reservations in my country, where alcohol has just destroyed their civilization. I bet their resistance to alcohol, the drug, constitutionally isn't that much better than a Japanese person's. You know, it 100% has to do with their society and the optimism and what their society gives them. And the same thing for the fentanyl crisis right now. And there's almost, this is like the phrase what I say about the phrase "only God can save us." It has a million different meanings, and all the meanings are true. Right? You could kind of change the meaning of only God can save us, and no matter how you interpret any of the words, it's always absolutely true. And the same thing is true for addiction as a symptom of societal failing. First of all, in order for a substance to be truly an addictive drug that destroys people's lives, the drug has to be introduced in a social way. Drugs don't exist independently of a societally recommended way of consuming them. Second order, there's also the dimension where society sets up certain people to need addiction and to see addiction as a potential escape from their problems. So there's that dimension to it. And then the third level, there is, okay, now we have a whole group of people getting addicted. What are we going to do about it? Because I believe very strongly that if the West, I hate that word, if Western countries were serious about cracking down on addiction to the level of someone like Lee Kuan Yew or perhaps President Bukele in El Salvador, I believe that we could solve the addiction problem just instantly in this problem. We're suffering from a fentanyl crisis right now, and I don't know if this is going on in Europe as well. But this is atrocious, and
not with fentanyl in the same way, I don't think.
Yeah, well, maybe there's another drug, but God willing, there isn't. But I mean, I believe that we could fix these problems anytime we wanted to. It's just that society it can't talk itself into why drug use is a bad thing, and it can't present a vision for people about what they could be doing with their lives that is better and more worthwhile.
What about other types of addiction? People talk about technology addiction, or pornography addiction. Is because there's a question of whether we should draw a distinction between substances for which, if you withdraw, you get very powerful physical withdrawal symptoms that could even be lethal, versus stuff that's just habitual. Is there a clear divide there in your mind?
I don't think there is a clear divide. I think that that's actually a cop-out in some sense. I think that, well, I mean, the great problem is, especially with these digital technologies, like I'm addicted to a drug, and that drug is called Twitter. And I quit it for about a year or 2 years between 2020 and 2022, and then I got back on because
every time you try and quit Twitter, you end up on a live stream with a leftist.
Yes. No, I genuinely did quit it for more than a year. But I mean, this is absolutely an addictive drug, and I have not found the correct boundaries to place around this drug. And this is 100% something that society needs to take on. If it leaves the Twitter drug unaddressed, then it's going to end up in a position where there's huge problems. And so I don't think there's a clear distinction, really. I think that there is a distinction in the sense that there are some addictions that we just can't have society manage because they're too intimately connected to people's lives, and sort of inviting the state in at that level or in certain places is just not something that it's not a role that we want the state to play, right? But I think that your neighbor's Twitter addict, and this, I can't believe I'm saying this because this is the exact opposite of what I believed as a man in my 20s, but like your Twitter addiction is 100% your neighbor's problem. Your pornography addiction is 100% your neighbor's problem. And
libertarians are foaming in the mouth.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I don't want neighbors to
Ayn Rand is turning over in her grave.
I don't want my neighbor to look in, set up spy cameras around my house to catch me in all of this. But living in a society where people are addicted to these things is way worse than living in a society where they're not. And we have to, I mean, it's hard to kind of not drift into cliches, but there has to be a conversation around this, and any healthy culture that emerges out of the current chaos we're in is going to have to start with a larger discussion about addiction and how that's managed socially and potentially legally for this harder stuff.
Do you think, even though we maybe represent a scattered online community, we can nonetheless try to address these failings for ourselves? There's a
Mhm.
certain weakness, I think, in spending all of our time criticizing the way that the whole of society operates, when what we should really be doing is building structures under our own control where we can address the problems directly. Do you see what I mean? Like
Yeah, no, I understand.
we have a weakness because we're not just living together. Um, but to what degree is it possible for us as an online community? It's in one way, if the solution to the problem is get offline, and our community is online, then it's a non-starter maybe. But
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could have responsible social. You could encourage people to use responsible social media. I think the problem with online enforcing online addictions is that the
yeah,
thing you're looking to is part of the addiction itself.
yes,
I've had people, join support groups for things like alcohol online,
online.
or other addictions, and
Hmm.
obviously, when people a lot of people have been talked out of pornography addictions, and I have every reason to believe that they're sincere by interacting with social media online. So I
Mm,
think you can use one hand to wash the other, but I don't think your
mm.
Twitter fans are going to help you overcome your Twitter
Your Twitter
addiction.
addiction.
Or Twitter friends are going to help you overcome your Twitter addiction. This is the problem with Discord too, because Discord also has the same, somewhat similar but
Yeah,
different quality. It's very
uh,
difficult to create community on Discord because it's very hard to see what's real and what's fake.
mm,
And whereas Discord can help you with a bunch of real life things, uh, your Discord is not going to help you manage your Discord time. And your Twitter friends aren't going to help you manage your Twitter time. So I think that we kind of have to build on scaffolding that is outside the site of addiction itself. The number one way to manage
right.
addictions is to at least addictions to things that you can't help but take in a small amount of, is to manage the time and place in which you're in contact with the drug.
Hmm. That's very good advice, and I'm going to give you another 18 for this round.
Sounds good.
Round 5: technology, natural sciences, or Christology.
Natural sciences.
All right. Quantum entanglement. This, by the way, these are much more difficult questions than any of the other rounds. Quantum entanglement disproves the notion of locality in physics. A
Ah.
unified theory of physics is the ultimate goal of science, or we can and should extend life indefinitely.
Um, I'll do the unified. I mean, the unified. The questions A and B are very
Oops.
similar, so I'll do the B one. It doesn't
Yes, go
matter
ahead.
because A and B are the same one
Okay.
essentially, right? I mean, the as soon as you start thinking deeply about the unified theory of physics, and think seriously about it, and I don't know how this doesn't occur to more physicists. You kind of realize that it couldn't possibly be what it claims to be. The physics theory believes that it's a theory of everything, but what is very likely, what it very likely is simply the simplest the simplest formal way of explaining all repeatable observational experiences that we've had. And when you put it, then that's what physics is, right? The simplest formal mathematical way of expressing all repeatable observations that humans can make.
Mm,
That that's fine. I mean, first of all, that's not the end all and be all of all models, since because of probability and because of uncertainty, different models and different formulas will be needed, if nothing else, to be at all practically useful in other dimensions. And so science, by which I mean the formal way of organizing, categorizing experiences that we can test via experimentation, or statistically with repeated observations, that will have applications beyond simply the unified theory of physics. And I always kind of appeal to that famous Box quote. He was a statistician. He said, "All models are false, but some models are useful."
mm.
And I think that's more or less what we're saying with physics itself. And that's not even getting into the possibility that, you know, there's truth outside of what you can express merely in formal languages, which I think is absolutely true.
Hmm.
But expressing that and describing it is not a simple task.
It's interesting you mentioned models. There's a bit of a debate in metaphysics about whether we can ever really know anything. Like perhaps
Mhm.
a model that has high predictive power but has no claim towards a metaphysical reality is the best we can do. So how real do you think the scientific conclusions that we've reached, say in physics, actually are?
That's I actually don't think they're really that real. I mean, the problem is that I mean we can see very, very clearly that there are areas of reality that have an impact on our observable world, but that are almost impossible for us to observe. And almost no theories about the universe don't sort of postulate. You have like this M-brain theory stuff that the big question for the grand unified theory, at least last time I read up about it, which was probably 10 years ago, the big problem is obviously the unification of gravity with the other forces that have been
Mm,
somewhat unified over the course of the late 20th century and early 21st century. And
mm,
the thing is, gravity is a lot stronger. So what they do in most of these theories that aren't like crazy multiverse type things, which also has this problem, is they invent sort of like in some n number of dimensions that are structured
mm,
either to be too big to be observable or too small to be observable, such that gravity can extend in these dimensions in a weird way, such that uh, you know, the numbers balance essentially and can be unified in one way, shape, or form. The problem is that any theory of physics postulates the existence of a universe that in its own mathematical conception, we only inhabit observationally a small slice of. What is the chance that we're just not missing something entirely? If we didn't have this asymmetry in this one equation, we wouldn't have imagined these 7 other dimensions. Right?
right.
Imagine if there's some other force that is sort of completely oblique to our
Yes.
understanding, and then all of a sudden,
Beyond our
like
imagination.
you add on like 20 more dimensions or whatever, and what happens is no matter how you slice it, the richness of human observation seems to be a very small slice of reality, and that is even if these sort of equations we've developed to predict the world are actually indicative of an external reality and not simply just a superimposed model. There's this thought experiment I thought of when I was doing this about, if you are this sort of, if you're in Plato's cave, if you're this dead body, right, this mummy or whatever, that's semi-conscious, and the only thing you can see or feel is like you get an electric shock every time somebody walks past your casket, right? And
Hmm.
if that was your reality, you would assume that like the electric shocks would be largely normally distributed around when people were frequenting wherever you're being displayed, right?
Hmm.
And the problem is like that would give you like, if this mummy could come up with a mathematical formulation, this would be like this very it would be like this very, very neat set of normal distributions organized around a cyclical yearly time series. That wouldn't tell you anything about the world you actually occupy.
Yeah. Good luck
Like,
extrapolating to understand society
yeah,
and psychology.
yeah, but that's not what's actually going on. So the mathematical
Yeah.
model you would create with that limited
Yeah.
amount of perception would be, it could be as sophisticated. You could make the time series analysis of frequent visits as sophisticated as you want, but it wouldn't capture the actual reality of what's going on. I'm afraid that despite all of our physics, we are still not completely out of Plato's cave. And
Mm.
I guess if you limit science, even if you limit science, I think people still need models, even if you limit science to just explaining the physical world that can be observed repeatably. You still need external models to kind of get any kind of richness to the scientific endeavor.
In the Unreal game engine, there's a technology called nanite, which means that you can import super high resolution objects, and it will algorithmically cut them up into the pieces that are visible and automatically do level of detail and various tricks. So you can, it only renders the things exactly when they're needed. I sometimes imagine that what if the world that we live on is actually being run in a similar way? Like God is just, when we get our microscope out and we look down it, he's like, okay, I guess I'll render that in high resolution. And then as soon as we stop
that's
looking,
kind
it's
of how that's kind of how quantum particles work, right?
Well, if you don't observe, they behave differently.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I mean, an electron only, I mean, this has a tendency to be abused by science explainers, right? But an electron only kind of has a solidified velocity or location when something occurs to the electron to need it to have that property. Right. So
in the very instant after it's observed, then it diverges again.
Yeah, it explodes into a probability. I mean, what does it even mean to be a probability wave, right?
Right.
But it explodes into a probability such that, like a kooky alternative theory of physics is that there only is one electron in the entire universe, and that electron it's at such a fine time resolution. It appears at every one of the locations in all of the atoms. As it's needed to, and it wouldn't change anything about physics if that were true.
This comes from the fact that the physics in like a Feynman diagram of an electron and a positron are exactly the same. It's just that time is reversed, right? So you can imagine this one particle was like sewing like a tapestry going through the universe back and forth and back and forth. Whenever it goes forwards, it's matter, and whenever it goes backwards, it's antimatter. All right. I think, am I right? You've still got 10 minutes to do the last round?
No, got 20 minutes.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, you can take the full 20 minutes on the last round. Let's hope we pick a good topic. I'm going to give you 18 again. Literature, software and mathematics, or eschatology?
Oh, I work in software and mathematics, so I'm going to take literature. I'm avoiding things that are my profession here. I'll take literature. Yeah.
All right. Fictional narratives have great power. The traditional literary canon is overrated, or translation is impossible. But feel free to springboard off these to.
Oh wow, this is tough. I have opinion again. Once more, I kind of have opinions on all of them. Well, I think the first one is I can't go there because that's just going to be a background for the other two. I want to talk about the literary canon, I guess, a little bit, and I probably will touch on the translation question because this is something that I am going to write an article on, perhaps after I finish writing my speech for the conference that's coming up in America. But this is something that the canon. And this is one of these artifacts of the 20th century. I think that there were sort of vaguer notions of the canon previously in the 19th century, but I think it became a little bit of an obsession in the 20th century. Yeah, there was certainly a concept of like the great books and the classics throughout Western history. And was it Alan Bloom that was the guy who was really into the canon? Alan Bloom and Harold Bloom, I constantly get them mixed up.
I don't know, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I mean, this is like a set of books that are supposed to create the backbone of Western civilization, and people kind of try to force their way through.
There's a book, The Western Canon, Books and School of the Ages, 94 by Harold Bloom.
Harold Bloom, that's it. Yeah, I always mix up my Blooms. Yeah, that was the guy. He tried to revive this concept this is something that was always kind of a big, project of the American conservative movement, was to revive interest in the Western canon. The problem, obviously, is that an approach that organizes literature around the canon, or a canon, it's not kind of respecting how people interact with books organically. I am kind of making my way to defend the concept of the canon, and people always ask me for like, what are the top 20 reactionary book reads? And it's kind of, I don't think that's sort of a proper question, because books are contextual on a certain place you are in life, and a certain and and when people ask me for like a list of books they should read, and one of my favorite books to demonstrate this was Dante's Divine Comedy. And this book is something that I've read it 3 times or 4 times, and it's one of the most it's one of the most influential books in my life. However, several things. I can't easily tell you why it's a good book.
Hmm.
It's very difficult. I've tried explaining, like, do a review of the Divine Comedy. I
Hmm.
can't really explain why it's a good book. I can't really explain what I got at it. Unlike something like Dostoevsky, where it's very easy to explain the emotions, and I think my story would be very, very similar to most other people who've read something like Crime and Punishment or The Brothers Karamazov. It's very difficult to describe, why Dante's Divine Comedy is impactful. Um,
Hmm.
and moreover, when I read it as a teenager, I got absolutely nothing out of it. Right?
Ah.
Absolutely nothing out of it. And so this was just a book that had to be kind of read and then reread at various different points of my life, and that was it was completely dependent on time. And so, this is the whole question. The essay I'm kind of trying to write was about the decline of books, of the American bookstore. What makes a bookstore good, and what makes why do modern bookstores suck so much? And my father ran a used bookstore as a retirement project, and I used to work in
Hmm.
it, and it was a very popular little place, because most of the used bookstores had gotten run out of business by, at that time, the big box bookstores, and then also at that time Amazon. And I always think about like the independent bookstores. The philosophy of bookstores is we want to be Portland's Powell Books. Do people know about Powell's Books in Portland? This is everyone on the west coast of America knows about this place. It's like this giant bookstore. It's like bigger. I couldn't imagine a bigger bookstore than Powell's in Portland, Oregon. It's like
Uh-huh.
5 stories of books, and it's a
Wow.
gigantic building, and they even have an overflow bookstore, and it has basically every single book you could ever imagine. The bookstore sucks. It's a terrible bookstore because everything is in it. And it also plays into this whole stupid book culture thing where, like, read books. I'm into books. Um, the, the whole point of a bookstore is that my father was criticized about this when he originally started the store. He only had books that he himself wanted to read.
Huh.
So his bookstore comprised of one section of European history, one section of California history, and the rest dedicated to philosophy and mathematics. And then
Huh.
nothing else, no literature. And eventually my mother got him to actually open up to literature of varieties. But he had kind of a good idea, which is that you go into a bookstore so that you can learn what you need to read from the wisdom of the people who selected the books. and
Huh.
and so what you're dealing with when you interact with a bookstore is sort of an organic experience where you are at a particular day and a particular moment in history entering a particular bookstore, and this bookstore is going to teach you about something that you might be interested in. If it is just every book that has ever been written, housed,
Well,
even with like good architecture like Powell's, right? That's not, you're never going to find a book in that moment. There's no experience going into the bookstore at that stage. And you know
the closest thing you'll get is if you go into a Waterstone and look at the children's section. You will discover what they want children to learn about, and it's
what's
horrible.
Waterstone? Is it it's
Oh,
a
that's a bookstore, a chain of bookstores in
oh,
the
okay.
UK.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, because they're recommended reading lists. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's a whole different story with education. But I mean, like, bookstores are sort of, you're interacting with a force that's trying to educate you. And so, you know, I think that when we talk about traditional literary canon, what we're really talking about is sort of an educational plan. I think that's very, very important. But I don't like to think of the literary canon as like a top 10 list. Oh, what I like to think of it, the literary canon is as sort of we are going to introduce you to ideas at various ages of your life, and and then have you wrestle with them in your own individual way as part of an educational experience. And I think that's the way that we should conceptualize the literary canon. And I don't think it's structured that way, so I would criticize it that way. um and Also, the you know I think that there's a sort of a problem with books and how we educate children around books. There are certain books that you kind of need to read in a group to get anything out of them. There are certain kind of books that, and you shouldn't. I don't think you should really force feed people books uh, necessarily. I think this is another problem with sort of the canon way of thinking. You start reading things like Aristotle and you don't appreciate what Aristotle is, or you start reading Sophocles or any of these, a number of these people, and you have no appreciation for what this thing is. And not to quote Aristotle, I think I'm quoting Aristotle when I say that it's education to kind of teach children what they should like. And I think that the purpose of a canon is to do that well. It's to kind of create, the purpose of the canon is to, at every stage of a young man or young woman's development, create little enclaves or bookstores where they're pointed in directions that they wouldn't go otherwise, and kind of nudged in the direction of challenging themselves, and given and literally challenged to read things that are hard for them to read, but not force feeding it to the point where they're trying to take on ideas they're just not ready to receive yet. And that's the purpose of a bookstore. That's a purpose of an educational institution. And I think sort of the canon is a guide for that.
Do you think that the canon, in a way, could be a reactionary thing to support, given the, these days there's always an attempt to broaden people's reading lists to include, diverse range of authors from all different backgrounds, in reaction against the canon, quote unquote? Isn't there something inherently conservative about having a fixed canon, books that were considered important 100 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's naturally. I mean, yeah. Then the process is just so necessarily conservative. Even progressives trying to create their own mini canons of diversity are kind of doing a conservative act,
right? Yes,
and,
unless you're going to pick a book that was written yesterday, it's probably going to have views that are old-fashioned, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean,
whoever you pick.
I mean, I agree it's conservative, and I feel like there's kind of more there lurking under the surface, in the sense that, I mean, there really just need to be common texts that we all read, and there has to be a certain amount of force to that. I just think that the amount of literacy and like biblical illiteracy is just an obstacle for understanding and for having any common culture. And the fact that there aren't books that are being kind of read and reread and internalized at an emotional level is kind of troubling to me. Or the fact that there isn't common poetry or common songs. I think that these sort of communal experiences, and I don't know how to. I mean, it has to be done communally or not at all. I mean, I could force myself to read. Well, I don't force myself at this stage in my life. I'm way too old. I mean, I probably enjoy some of these books, but I could, force, my son to read or heavily pressure him into reading some of these books. But if it's not done in an environment where it becomes kind of the background of his existence, or the imagistic background of his existence, then in many ways it's failed at its purpose. And you know, a lot of times pop culture has supplanted these things as the background imagistic system
Mm,
of
mm,
our world. And to kind of link it back to all of them, you know, uh, the purpose of revivifying things like music and theater and movies in these moments is to create, you know, individual moments of experience through which we communicate with our ancestors, because they have similarity and draw on imagistics that are taken from these deeper traditions. And you know, and everything in our modern society is kind of trying to break that link.
mm,
And you get a bunch of like really cheap products. You get these Marvel movie products which are entertainment, and it's almost like you somehow tried. I mean, you know, there are some, you know, especially in the whole Thanos saga, there are a lot of sort of references to Greek tragedy in that are very vague, but it really does feel more so than in Star Wars, and certainly more so than in Lord of the Rings, that they really intentionally tried to make the saga reference as little from the past and resonate as weakly with previous religious experiences as they possibly could, and still have
mm,
something that could pass as entertainment.
mm. That's really interesting. I wonder how conscious the people creating it were of that, or if you, even if they weren't conscious of it, if you could detect that by talking to them, that they had an aversion to previous mythos, religiosity. It
Mhm.
feels like um, a p- I mean, maybe both of us are just predisposed not to like the aesthetic of Marvel again. To go back to my
Yeah.
fear of criticizing something in a superficial way, but um, I never had a strong pull towards Marvel in the same way as a lot of other people seemed to. So I do feel like there was something lacking, and it's either that it was genuinely lacking, or I just wasn't able to hook into it. But
Well,
maybe
I
what
mean,
you're talking about is correct.
there is the best essay I read this last year was Zero HP Lovecraft. This touches both on Marvel and on other modern forms. He called it, the essay's called Zendaya and the Art of Multiverse Maintenance, where
Uh-huh.
he examines a Marvel movie. I think it was some kind of Spider-Man movie, and he uses it as a broader framework to discuss the multiverse science
Mm,
fiction movie. Which, you know, if you I've been told, and I can't really believe it, that the science fiction movie Everything Everywhere All at Once was the winner of the Academy Award, which no one cares about anymore in America. And
yeah.
and the thing is it just like it doesn't matter that it has like an Asian background. The thing is that it's the multiverse, and indeed all of these kind of the Marvel feeling it's kind of consciously divorced from tradition.
Mm,
And the multiverse allows it to do that because it kind of forces it into this progressive monomyth, as Zero HP Lovecraft points out. And it operates in this kind of very perverse way, where it's not like Zero HP Lovecraft's very involved in the whole kind of race concept. It's not that it's like anti-Western or anti-white. You know, I think the writer was Chinese, but like nothing about the Chinese tradition is going to be visible through this lens of the multiverse, except for like the elements that have become pop culture, like kung fu, right?
mhm,
And you know, you end up in kind of this anti-cultural, not kind of like not kind of like anti-Western, just like anti-generally culture, where everything is kind of infinitely interchangeable and infinitely dependent on human choice, and there's no element of constraint or particularity. And I just think that this is a way that modern Hollywood writers are comfortable writing. There was this line that
mm,
Peter Hitchens had about the secularization of British schools, and he said, like, it was stuck with me for whatever reason. He said that the reason why these these icons are torn down is not because they're consciously thinking, oh, I hate Christianity, I want to torn it down. It's because they encounter these elements of spirituality, and they don't know what to do with them. They realize
Mm,
that they're powerful. They realize that they reference something that's beyond them that they can't have a handle on, and
mm,
because it to them it just feels like this confusing thing, and they just don't want to deal with it. Right? They just want to have
yeah.
like the simple thing. So they have to they want to go around it, and it does. This is why brutalist architecture is like it's hard to live in a city where you're operating under uh in the shadow of like this beautiful Tudor building, or maybe a restorationist building, right? Because everyone knows that being in the shadow of that kind of thing has spiritual implications, and since no one can explain the spiritual implications, it's like watching a horror movie where like there's this ghost that's off screen and you don't know what it is, but you know it's there, right? And so like you
Mm,
have to tear it down. Then copying this from Peter Hitchens, right? You have to tear it down so that you stop thinking about this thing, right? And I feel the same way about modern movies. They're deracinated because if they weren't deracinated, they would be haunting for the people who made them and
mm,
consumed them. They would carry with them
yeah.
implications. And there's
Yeah.
something I want to say, and I know I'm at time now, and well, my wife's not back yet, so I guess I could go a little over. There's kind of I could put a question on to you here. This is a question that's been troubling me for quite some time about literature, and
Mm,
it's this, and it's there's it's obvious that we are in a particular moment of sort of cultural deadness, or the culture reproduces utter crap and totally forgettable, and even the stuff that's passable isn't very good. But I constantly go back and forth between thinking that this is just a product of the fact that we live in a dying civilization and we're in an age that can't make good art,
mm,
and thinking that just the people who could make good art just aren't in a position to do it. Because every now and again, when I'm kind of forced to watch one of these Netflix movies with my
yeah.
wife, the next day what I'm thinking of is like, I bet that I could just take the script and I could rewrite it in a few key ways, and it would not only would it be good, like not only would it not be cringe, but it could lead to like a poignant moment that would make people's souls sing, right? If you
Yeah.
just with a few little modifications. And
Mm.
maybe that's vainglory on my part, but I'm kind of wondering like, how hard would it be to
Well,
make a movie
this is
like that, right?
weirdly, this very question is probably the thing that set me off on the intellectual journey in the first place, because it was such a mystery to me that a studio could put so much money into millions and millions of pounds into a film, and it's bad because of the writing. And you think,
Yeah.
well, okay, what if you put £500,000 into writing a script? Surely you'd have a pretty good script if you spent that
Yeah,
much on
yeah.
it. Surely it would be worth doing. And then you realize that I think that this led me to auteur theory, right? You have to have an individual ultimately who is the artistic thrust of the project. You can't scale that up at all. Any attempt to do it by managerialism and bureaucracy destroys the integrity of it. So you can't throw money to make one person a better artist. So I really do think, and that's what led me to kind of see through the cracks of democracy. Like, but the other reason this is an interesting question for me is because I don't know if you've gathered, but I'm studiously working on making a radio play that's going to
Oh.
be a 90-minute piece with a bunch of people doing voice acting and a full score, and like it so it is,
Oh,
and
really?
it's like very ambitious. It's supposed to
I love
be
radio plays. That's awesome.
great. Well, it's coming out soon. So and this is a good opportunity for me to remind listeners that there's a new YouTube channel I'm setting up for this to go on. The link will be in the description. So if you're interested, go and click the notification bell so you don't miss that. But consequently, because I've been trying to actually do it, I'm quite conscious at the moment of how vulnerable you feel when you create something versus how strong you feel when you criticize it. It's just kind of links to my comments earlier in the stream. You know,
100%. Yeah.
it's very easy to go and watch something and feel like it's failed, and then pick anything that didn't work and say, because they made this decision and the thing wasn't good, and I can identify the problem, I'm better than them. It kind of puts you in a position of strength. Whereas when you're creating a thing, you're making a million decisions, and all the decisions cross over with each other, and you don't really know if it's going to work or not until all the pieces are in. You can kind of throw a draft version together or try and do a read through before you make the thing. But to a degree, have you ever seen like they take scenes from movies and remove the music, for example, and the scene falls apart totally? So when you're writing a script, you have to imagine that the scene is going to have the music in it, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to work. So you can't experience the thing until it's done. So inevitably, I think every time you create a film, you can't really judge it until it's done. And you hear about this, right? That studios will do a reshoot, like a significant reshoot, after they've finished. They thought they'd done all of principal photography, and then they changed the script drastically, and it's always a mess. But I kind of think, you spend $3 million on a thing, and you cross your fingers and hope that it's going to be good. The only person who can really make it happen, I think, is the director. And the director, if they're still alive creatively, are going to be taking risks, and sometimes the risks don't pay off. So I'm quite sympathetic now to creators.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the problem I have just with my own life is just setting aside time for fiction consumption, because I have sort of little time that's free ordinarily. It usually gets absorbed with writing, or if I'm reading, I'm usually trying to read like a great book or something like that that's been on my shelf forever. Or maybe not a great book, maybe just like the latest political thing that someone's handed me. And as a male, I always have a hard time consuming fiction, even though it's a difficult I have a hard time. I can't listen to fiction audiobooks unless they're really dumb. It's too involved. And the radio play thing, I think that's an interesting dimension, because I very much enjoyed the radio play genre. I remember obviously the old Orson Welles ones, but then also the BBC did a few of them. They had one I remember really prominently, Neuromancer, from the early 2000s. It was really, really good. I mean, I think that this.
Well, hopefully you can find 90 minutes when I finally get this thing together.
Is it an original script, or is it? Or
it's
is
an original script. The starting point was I wanted to do a kind of a new twist on the concept of the Matrix, because I felt like that central scene that has become the core of a lot of internet discourse of the red pill, the blue pill. I thought that was such an interesting concept, and I thought, what if I was to use that idea as a starting point, but took it in a completely different direction? So
that's interesting. That's really interesting. And 90 minutes is a good time period. That's a good
length.
Time length for a radio play, right? Because it's movie length. The problem with audiobooks always is that they're like 14 hours long. And then like you put it down and you come back and you don't remember the characters' names, right? And unlike the novel, you can, first of all, it's easier to remember because it's in print. Second of all, you can kind of flip back a little bit, right? So and that's an interesting take. I think that would be really really, really good. I'm definitely thinking more in terms of things that are more primal, like theater and stuff like that. And there's a certain, and also sort of poetry, there's a certain mystery why Shakespeare is so eternal, and why why he translates so well into other languages, right? I mean, I guess he's just this ultra genius, but I've always kind of wondered if sort of the form of writing plays and poetry didn't make it somehow, a little bit more universal and translatable through time.
everyone gets to experience a version of Shakespeare that is a little bit adapted to their times, but also trying to stay faithful. So it's actually, it's got both strands. It's neither so alien to us that we can't relate to it without studying the time period for 4 years, but it's also not so current and modern as to be throwaway and pandering.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
Absolutely.
spectrum, right? If you go and watch a Shakespeare play, some of them are very authentic and some of them are modernized versions.
You know what I kind of always struggle with, you know, this is related, but I always struggle in modern movies. I always struggle with what is the point of catharsis that I'm supposed to take away from this? I mean, this is the reason why all modern golden age of television shows, like very few of them had even adequate endings. And even the ones that did have adequate endings, like Breaking Bad, the ending was always a little weaker than it should have been, because it feels like,
Mm.
you know, the point of a piece of art is to kind of leave you in a certain place with a certain kind of emotion. And
Mm.
you know, that's why I appreciate Ari Aster, even though the emotion is always existential demonic horror, right? But
Yeah.
he certainly inculcates that feeling with me. When I get the end of any of these modern things, it's just this point. It's just pointless. There's no point of catharsis that I don't feel like my life is being enhanced. I feel it's either sort of like a cute political message, or it's just this sort of like vague feel good existentialism, like that's the way things
Mm.
are, or you know, like the good guys won, the end, you know, you have consumed the product. And that's never the case in something like Shakespeare. In Shakespeare, it always feels like the catharsis is so sharp. Like I understand when I'm somebody's, when I finish King Lear. Good lord, have you watched the end of King Lear? It's
Yeah.
brutal, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I, you know, it's even brutal for a tragedy. A lot of tragedies have they end on kind of notes of hope a little bit. Um,
Mm.
and when you end something like The Tempest, there's a sort of like this feeling of divine order that I really want. I think the last TV show that ended on a note like that was Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it's not surprising that Star Trek: The Next Generation had such a cult following, because it literally was the religious expression of liberal progressivism put into a TV show. And so when it ended in this very shake, I don't know if you're aware of this TV show. You're aware of the Star Trek Next
I,
Generation, but you
I'm
may not
aware. I
remember
haven't
the
watched it.
ending. Yeah, the
Yeah.
ending ends on a moment of actual catharsis, where there actually is a Shakespearean speech and a kind of moment of comedic resolution that kind of underlines the feeling that it wants to impart to you. And then you walk
Mm.
out of that thing, you're like, okay, like I understand what this piece like the point is to kind of explore the world with a sense of wonder and optimism. And
Mm.
all of the things that I saw throughout Star Trek are feeding this religious devotion and reminding me that this is the thing. I get to the end of any modern movie, Marvel, Star Wars, whatever. I have no idea what the moment of catharsis is supposed to be.
But the end of Return of the Jedi was very
Oh yeah.
strong.
Oh yeah. Well, that was the moment of redemption, right?
Yeah. And I think the ending, when you, if you write something, you are making a promise at the beginning and the middle of your work that you have a payoff, and that the payoff will give you the key to unlock the rest. It's like in a strong piece of art, it's both propulsive as you're watching it, but then you have the opportunity, if you make it correctly, to double. You know, the viewers have invested their time in you, and if you do it right, you pay that back double, because they then look back on the experiences they had with fresh eyes and go, oh wow, the reason you
Yeah.
can do that is because you're writing the thing backwards. You start with your ending and you put the seeds in, and that's what makes the experience of a strong story feel magical, I think.
Yeah,
Because
100%, right? And that's, you know, I can't, I really want that. I really want to have these moments. And even the Godzilla movie, which was really kind of stupid, but I really did enjoy it, had this insane moment of catharsis, right? And it wasn't
Mm,
actually as cheap as you might think, because it did directly reference a real event, the end of World War II for Japan. And
mm,
but I remember kind of just feeling like, oh my God, like I got catharsis watching like this. The ending had something that I could feel like I emotionally internalized and took with me for the next day. It was a little bit,
mm,
cheap, but it was at least something, right? And you
mm,
could tell that they were building towards that ending from the outset, right? It was not something, that they just put on at the end. Like you couldn't see the writer's fingerprints on the ending at all.
mm. Another more modern film that has, I think, a cathartic ending is. Did you watch the Peter Jackson King Kong?
Yeah. Well, that was
Which
ages ago.
a long time ago. Okay,
Yeah.
not modern, maybe, but
Well, that was in 2004, 6, something like that. It was right after Lord of the
maybe.
Rings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh wow, it really was a long time ago. Anyway, the Kong, his species on the island which they
Mhm.
got him from, was disappearing. So there's some very um some very kind of significant, poignant moments before they leave the island, where he's just
Mhm.
looking out at the sunset, thinking, and it's quite emotional. And then he sort of goes on this bender around New York, smashing
Yeah.
stuff up, and and then he sits on the top of New York and looks around at the city, and it's kind of a mirror of the moment that he was looking out over the
Yeah.
jungle.
And he's
And then you
totally
kind
out
of
of
think about,
place, right? Yeah.
yeah, but then you kind of think about yourself sitting in a modern city, looking out at the things that used to exist. You think about the Englishness as like, is that
Yeah, yeah.
passing out of the world or whatever? It's kind of very resonant. And then
How can
it
you
was
exist in
beauty
this
that killed
modern
the
world?
beast. Yeah.
I mean, that's what made Peter Jackson sort of the last master of the adaptation, is that when he watched King Kong, he knew the moments that made King Kong. And then
Right.
when he got to remake the movie, he took those moments and he extended them, right? He
Mm,
he he made them more poignant by focusing on them. King
yeah.
Kong, the movie, I think I rewatched like 4 years ago, and I remember thinking like really needed to cut about half of the CGI scenes on the island, just so like there are some scenes that just like you're just watching them and going like this was a spectacle, but at the same time, I can't
You
believe
could cut
any
a
of
lot
us.
out of the Odyssey, right?
I get
Yeah,
no one would survive this. Nobody would survive this, right?
I see
um,
what you mean.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
But
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 but it
again, to the
wasn't relevant, right? Yeah.
yeah, what do you actually criticize? What matters?
I mean, this is the thing. What to take it back to like the epic poetry. I mean, this is I don't know whose theory of a tragedy this was. I don't think it was Nietzsche's. I think it was someone earlier, right? But like every epic poem is building up to sort of a single scene, right? So the Iliad's
Mm,
building up to the scene where Priam asks for Hector's body back from Achilles, and the Odyssey is building up to the scene where Odysseus slays the suitors, right? And there are obviously important scenes on the way to that, but that is sort of the cathartic scene, right? And the Bhagavad Gita is the scene where Arjuna rides, and I think it's Krishna rides the
mm,
chariot, right? That's the scene
mm,
in Bhagavad Gita. And all of these there is one moment that is supposed to be kind of the play is moving towards,
mm,
and that is or and maybe it could be several moments if it's a little bit unfocused, right?
mm,
But without that centerpiece, then there's not. And this is the great thing with Game of Thrones, right? The Game of Thrones was this excellent kind of setup for a tragedy, but the tragedy had no purpose to it. And the author's like, well, I'm going to make a bittersweet ending. I mean, well, how are you going to do that? Like, you haven't, like, since there is no purpose, uh, what could possibly be the sweetness and the bitterness if everything is just sort of existentially, bleak? And, this is something that modern movies have just completely forgotten. I don't, you know, we can't even really we don't even understand what it is to appreciate a movie the way that Peter Jackson appreciated the original King Kong.
mm. Mm. J.J. Abrams, of course, is criticized for his what is it?
The
The
mystery
mystery
box.
box. Yeah,
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the issue in a lot of modern cinema is that they've learnt the forms but not the purpose. They know how to ape the scene that they enjoyed from another movie without
Yeah.
understanding that it was the context that gave the scene poignancy.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So, I mean, this is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up. I have a little more time here.
yeah,
So not to interrupt you, right?
no, go.
Uh, the mystery box, what J.J. Abrams is obviously reacting to is the other classic master of cinema, Hitchcock, right? Who
Mm,
also used the mystery box, right? The MacGuffin. He literally invented the word for it, right?
mm,
Or I think I might come from some kind of Scottish folk tale, or whatever, right? But the MacGuffin, Hitchcock's MacGuffin, is the thing that keeps you interested, but is not particularly relevant to the plot. I mean, so it's interesting to see there are a few J.J. Abrams movies that actually work. Like you get,
mm.
I only can think of one, right? And that is, what was it, like 96 Cloverfield Lane. That's the one J.J. Abrams movie that worked. And why did it work? Because it's the one that actually looks like a Hitchcock movie, right?
Ah, interesting. Yeah,
Right. It's
yeah.
it, and the reason why Hitchcock used the MacGuffin, because he understood that the focus of Hitchcock's suspense is always the personal.
Hmm.
The problem with J.J. Abrams is that he wants to make like this epic science fiction stuff, whereas he begins by asking like existential questions, and the mystery box can't answer existential questions. It can only answer personal ones, because the MacGuffin
Mm,
in a Hitchcock movie, the MacGuffin is there so that a person can go through a particular trial. Right. So
mm.
I don't know how much I want to ruin Hitchcock movies, right? But like you never figure out why the birds were attacking people in the birds, right? And in Vertigo, man, am I going to spoil a movie that came out 67 years ago? But I mean, like,
Viewers who don't want to know the ending,
yeah,
mute for the next 10
I'll
seconds.
just say I'm not going to ruin it, but like the purpose of the murder is not the problem in Vertigo. The interesting thing about Vertigo is the psychological state of the man in question, and the murder that you don't even know occurred at any
Yeah,
stage is not
yeah,
it's not even really interesting how it occurred. It's more or less just a setup for the psychological state of the two main characters and what it reveals
mm,
about them, right? And
mm,
why 93 or whatever the number is, Cloverfield Lane, works is that when J.J. Abrams' scope is shrunk down to the size of a room and the interactions of
yeah,
three characters, then suddenly the
yes,
mystery box actually works, because the mystery box,
yeah,
all that does, the only reason why the mystery box exists in 93 Clover Lane is to see how one woman reacts to her imprisonment with two other mystery men and the changing circumstances around that.
mm,
What's in the mystery box doesn't matter, because what you're trying to figure out is how she reacts to a crisis situation and how it changes her. And if you use it that way, then you actually have a psychological drama. But J.J. Abrams, again, it's like cargo cult film writing, right? It's like, oh, this mystery box from
yeah,
Hitchcock, it's his MacGuffin. I'm going to use that, and he doesn't realize why it works, and so he uses it in
yeah.
something like Star Wars, and no one cares.
I think you have to ask, would the film or the book still be compelling if there was nothing on the line except the fate of the
Yeah,
protagonist? Like,
exactly.
would you care about Frodo's journey to Mount Doom if he wasn't carrying the ring that affected the whole of Middle Earth? And I think I'd argue yes, that even if he was a very small part of the overall plan, it, like, his journey personally is what's compelling in that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what, likewise for any great work on which the universe depends, the reason the audience cares is not because they don't care because the universe is at stake. I'd argue it's the other way around.
Mhm.
The universe being at stake is actually a reflection of the fact that we are living through we're living through the protagonist, and the thing that the protagonist cares about feels like the whole, when we,
Mhm.
like, I don't know, if somebody has a divorce, they think the universe has split in two. So when you watch a film and the universe is literally going to split in two, then it just is it's a portrayal of the stakes of something that happened that you can relate to in your life. I don't think it's not really interesting in a way to, like, people don't watch movies that are like two stars collide and a black hole is formed, even though that's a lot bigger than
well, maybe if you watch a Terrence Malick movie, you'll get that.
Yes, but Terrence Malick,
I actually kind of like Terrence Malick, right?
He's almost literally doing what I'm talking about, right? Because he'll have an emotional story and intercut with interstellar objects, and is almost making the same point I'm making. Which
there aren't Terrence Malick's movies, 100%, right? I mean, and you know, I do kind of like Terrence Malick and kind of don't like him, you know, but
his reputation seems to have fallen off a little bit. I think.
Well, he only makes one movie over and over and over again, right? And I think the early ones, you know, and it's really obvious which ones work and which ones don't, right? You know, I have my opinions about it. I think, you know, Days of Heaven really, really, really worked. And I think Tree of Life worked well enough. But then the other ones just kind of were just like, well, I use this idea and I'm going to do it again in different contexts. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, the personal universal catastrophe has to be given some kind of personal resonance and linked to the personal resonance. And I think, you know, Tolkien was a master of doing this. And, you know, Tolkien was somebody who was able to write history and make it. He was able to write fictional histories and make them sound interesting because he made them sound real. So, and that's an unusual talent. So Tolkien literally can write the Silmarillion, which is horribly boring, and I'll still read it and love it because Tolkien wrote it. But nobody else could write the Silmarillion and have it be good. It's, you know, other than Tolkien or somebody who was as intimately knowledgeable about European folklore as Tolkien, and as good of a wordsmith as well. But yeah, I mean, the pattern of most movies or most stories is essentially a personal drama that is played out, and that becomes something that touches on cosmic significance. And I think the thing is, we're so disconnected from what personal drama, what personal spiritual experience might actually be, and that's I think why our movies are getting so boring.
And so to pick a different example, so we didn't keep dunking on Marvel, Doctor Who got very tiresome with the fact that everything always had to be the fate of the universe is on the line. And then to overcome that, we just have to shout really loud and run really fast. And then, you know, at the vital moment, the thing happens. And you're like, that's not really telling me anything about the human experience. You know, if the stakes were smaller, I wouldn't care. But their solution to this was to kind of up the stakes every time. Now it's, you know, every multiverse is going to be destroyed unless we can defeat the Daleks. It's like, I'd rather have the stakes be much smaller. If it constrained you to telling an interesting story.
I can tell that I'm running out of time, and I have to say, like, I think you're absolutely right about that. But I'll have to end it here, Lambda. It was great.
Well, let me give you your score. I'm going to give you 20 points for that round. Excellent. And that brings you to the high score table, and you are at the top. So congratulations.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, bye. I have to go now, but thanks so much for having me on. Okay.
See you, Dave. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
And I'm going to take the opportunity now that he's gone to catch you for the last 10 minutes of the stream, or well, probably 2 minutes before I log off, and remind you of the various things, exciting things that are going on. Firstly, we did mention Ascension, the movie project, that the link is in the description. Depending on when you watch this, it may be out already. If not, make sure you go and hit the notification bell. The other thing that is rapidly approaching is the weekend retreat that I'm running on the 2nd to the 4th of August. It's in the UK, in Norfolk, and I'll make sure there's a link to the sign-up form for that. I am going to be charging you money so that, you know, to pay for room and board, but please don't let money be an obstacle. If anyone wants to come and join, just let me know, and I can make sure, I can waive the fee, as it were, or reduce the fee, whatever you can manage. But what is going to be happening on the weekend retreat, you ask? Well, we've done this a couple of years now, and it's always been just the most special, awesome time that we can spend together. It is a Christian retreat, but you don't have to be Christian to join. Just know as you're coming that your time will be spent partly in Bible studies, I'll be doing some talks, there'll be some singing of hymns. If this all seems kind of intimidating, like you've never done this stuff before, don't worry. There'll be lots of people in the same boat as you. But for whether you are, a Christian who's been a Christian for many years, like I have, and you want to connect with other Christians who are sort of like-minded, or you're interested in faith, even though that's not really why you came into this community, there'll be a lot there for you. It's just an amazing thing to bring a community together. People who normally are just sort of random names on the internet, and you meet them, you look in their eyes, and you're an actual real human being, a person who I can interact with in a direct way. But also, some people who've come have found it to be like a life-changing spiritual experience. I don't want to oversell it. I can't promise you that that'll happen. And praise God for anybody who's had a significant experience on the weekend retreat. That's totally all glory to God for doing that for people. But I do think you should seriously think about and pray about whether this is something for you. And if it is, then either send me a message, or the form's there and you can sign up and book your place. I don't think, see, if I was doing a sales job here, I'd be like, places will go, book quickly. But we've moved to a new venue, and there's actually loads of space. So, I want to say book quickly, book urgently, because it helps me with my organization. But I can't really honestly tell you that spaces are limited. I mean, they fundamentally are limited. If enough people join, then I would have to start saying no. But yeah, there's videos from the past 2 retreats. If you go back on the Lambda Bible Study channel, you can see what happened last year and the year before, to get a better idea of what's happening. But yeah, it would be awesome to meet more new people. Everyone I've met so far in real life who knows me from this YouTube stuff has been genuinely a lovely, interesting, deep person who, lots of people have lots of differences, but that makes it even more interesting. So yes, and there's people who are coming back year after year. So if you've been before, I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. All right, that's probably enough from me. I kind of don't know if this will be the last episode of the Gauntlet. So if it is, I guess then congratulations to Dave on winning the Gauntlet. If another person comes on next week, then maybe Dave will be unseated. It's entirely possible. Either way, yes, have a good evening, everybody.